and it ends with the descriptions given by the last classical Greek historian of Justinian's attempts to restore that Roman world as it had once been. The Romans had their own historians and their own ways of writing, but it is significant that a history of the Roman Empire can be framed by the writings of Greek observers of it. The Greeks were there first, and they were around for longer. The Roman Empire is also a time of which we have substantial knowledge, not such as to stand comparison with the mountains of documentation for the history of the modern world, but nevertheless incorporating evidence of many different sorts, physical as well as literate, permitting the recreation of a world of great sophistication and variety. It is a world that encourages different conceptions among those who write about it and their public, and that this public ranges far beyond the academic is evident from published lists of current and new books. One may still ask, what are the points of difference that mark a new book on such a well-established subject? The first question which faces the historian of any period is that of range. Where will it begin and end? As to the former, we should take for granted that any book on the Roman Empire will acknowledge the political and social antecedents of the Republican period. We must, however, be careful. The end of nearly half a millennium of Republican government in the 1st century BCE does not signal the end of res publica in its broader sense, that array of political, social, and legal institutions that belonged to the domain of public authority. However breached in the observance, the distinction between public authority and private power was one insisted upon by the founder of imperial government after the end of the civil wars that destroyed the Republic. Augustus and his successors may have expressed themselves differently as to what they had done with res publica, but none of them would have claimed its abolition. As late as 533, in publishing his Digest of Roman Law, Justinian referred to the emperor's duty, whenever an unexpected contingency might arise not covered by law, to correct and settle it and to subject it to suitable procedures and regulations, citing in support a famous jurist of the early 2nd century. There were tyrannical emperors, but the Roman Empire was not a tyranny. Whether a continuation of res publica in this broader sense was the only possible framework for a solution to the problems of the late Republic is an interesting question, but it was the solution that was adopted, and I have taken it to justify an introductory chapter on the political difficulties of the last 2 centuries BCE. There will be little here to surprise listeners familiar with the history of the late Republic, nor have I tried to invent surprises, but a book on the Roman Empire would be incomplete without such an introduction to the system that it replaced. If all presentations of the Roman Empire will share an interest in the history of the Republic, there is more diversity to be found in their terminal points. How, when, and in what circumstances did the Roman Empire come to an end? This is a very large question, and it will cause no surprise to find a variety of answers to it. A process of disintegration will always be less orderly than a process of growth. It will be harder to describe, and will invite different points of emphasis, as the ancient sources themselves lose their sense of direction, and modern writers take different views as to what point the disintegration is reached, and whether what is left should count as Roman. There are also more prosaic reasons. I have heard of cases where a lecture course has come to an end simply because time has run out on the lecturer, as if the Roman world had declined and fallen for the convenience of the syllabus. Choices have to be made, but it is still worth noticing how the terminal point of a history may imply a judgment as to what is important. The decision to end a book on the Roman Empire with the beginnings of Diocletian's Tetrarchy in the 280s may invite us to conclude that what follows is part of a different late Roman or even early medieval story.